keep it real by talking about what's happening in the industry. Here's what I heard today. Tackle the tough conversations. You talked about housing policy and get rid of a lot of the noise. We appreciate you keeping it real. We want you involved in the conversation. In fact, we've got a comment that just popped up. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Keepin It Real, a show that covers the hottest topics in real estate. I'm your host, Nick Bailey, President and CEO of RE/MAX, and we appreciate you joining us. Now, we are coming to you live on 3 platforms, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, and we want you to be part of the conversation. You're going to have opportunity to answer questions, join in the chat, maybe get your comments posted to the show, because we want you to be part of this dialogue. Now, let's take a look at a hot topic for this episode and see what's been in the news. And this one is no stranger to what's been in the news, which is the state of commercial real estate, adaptive reuse. I think it's fair to say every business has been re-examining not only if you're in office space, but if you're retail. And I think many of you have seen, even in your own lives, your own communities, maybe your favorite coffee shop has switched to be a yoga studio. Maybe now it's turned into a retail shop, or in some cases, maybe it's unfortunately still vacant. As hybrid and workplace environments have changed over the last couple of years, as every single one of us know very well, there's a lot of questions around it. The pendulum has swung for a lot of companies in one direction, where maybe they sent all employees home and the business became entirely, quote, virtual. In other cases, we're seeing companies that are requiring everyone to come back 5 days a week, and some in the middle wondering, what do we do next? That's what we're going to talk about today, is what's happening with the hybrid workspace? What's the state of commercial real estate? Is it a good investment? And maybe we'll talk about some numbers behind it. Now, before we jump in and invite our expert panelists to join us in this conversation, we want to hear from you, ask you a question that we will revisit at the end of today's episode. And so here we go. You can scan the QR code on the screen. You can follow the link, or just answer the question here within the episode and ask us, do you think will all workers return full-time, 5 days a week, to office space? Yes or no? Will workers return full-time? I think it's a question on a lot of people's minds. So to help round out today's conversation, I'd like to welcome our 2 guests, experts in this space, Mr. Mark Hulsey, managing broker of RE/MAX Results Commercial in Minneapolis. Hi, Mark. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for being here.
You bet. And we also have Rick Sharga, and he is the EVP of Market Intelligence with ATTOM Data. Rick, thanks for joining us as well.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Okay, gentlemen, let's jump into this right away. Mark, we'll start with you. Give us your take. You've been in commercial real estate a long time. What's overall state of the commercial market in your opinion?
Well, if we want to get specific with office, we'll start with the office piece here, Nick, since that's our key topic. So I'm licensed in multiple states. I'm in Florida, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota. So we'll start with Minnesota. And as you can imagine, with Minneapolis, the Minneapolis-St. Paul, our twin cities here, we're in a tough place for office. It's a very, very tough environment for the office product right now. We're probably sitting right now in the central business district of Minneapolis at around a 30% vacancy. So these are crazy numbers, as you can well imagine. And as we look on some of the other markets, we're looking at, Chicago, somewhere in the low 20s, but then you can contrast that to Fort Myers, and we might be in the 10, 12% range for some of those offices. So, and we play in the space from very small office to larger office, so we get to touch all those different size assets, and there is a big difference between those. But we're getting through it. We're getting through it.
So what I'm hearing is, as far as office space, there's plenty to be had right now, but it depends on what part of the country. Rick, how about you? I mean, you study this data from top to bottom. What's your take on the overall state?
Well, overall, commercial actually recovered pretty well from the pandemic. Until lending rates went up a few months ago, the market had been recovering remarkably well. Although to Mark's point, we saw a huge difference between central business district offices and the suburban office market. Suburban office market was doing very well. Central business district, not so well. And there are still some areas like Minneapolis, like New York City, like San Francisco, where the central business districts are almost like ghost towns. But if you look at second quarter numbers of sales, they were up about 10% year over year for the commercial market in general across the United States. We don't have complete Q3 numbers yet. Commercial data always lags a little bit. But what we are seeing looks like it's about an 11% decline year over year in the third quarter. And what we're hearing from people we talk to across the country is that they're a little bit concerned that the fourth quarter, which typically is your biggest quarter in the commercial market, is going to be a little difficult this year because of the increased cost of financing.
Okay, so question for both of you. What are you seeing in terms of a couple of major trends? I know everyone's reevaluated their overall footprint of office space. Are they going hybrid environment? I mentioned at the start of the episode, the pendulum swung one direction. I've got a good friend that his company just totally got rid of all of their commercial space. Some people now are coming back full time to their office space, and some are sitting in the middle. What are you seeing as the underlying trend of what's happening, given that people are kind of going, what are we going to do longer term?
I think it depends very much on the company. We have a little over 100 employees. We had downsized into a new office space after the pandemic, after the worst of the pandemic. And now we're in the process of getting ready to sublease the space because everybody prefers to work from home. So we are one of those companies that you referred to as kind of a virtual organization, and I suspect there's a lot of that going around. One of the things I am hearing in terms of a major trend is that the sublease market is crazy right now. We're seeing a lot of activity in terms of subletting existing space, and that's one of the reasons I don't think we'll see the full impact of COVID on the office market. Probably for a couple more years as people work their way through longer term lease contracts that they have with the building owners.
And let me follow up, Rick, and ask a question on that. Are you seeing with these subleases that are available, are these favorable rates? Are these something that people should be looking at if they're interested in office space? Is it a good deal right now? How did the specifics look?
Yeah, I mean, you're not looking at bargain basement rates, but you're certainly not looking at anything like we saw top of the market a couple of years ago. And in fact, that also holds true, Nick, if you're looking to buy an office facility. If you look at all the different industry sectors that comprise the commercial real estate market, the sector with the smallest price gains, in fact, the prices have been more or less flat for the last year, is the office market. And that's, again, particularly true in the central business district. The other thing you're seeing is that a lot of building owners are being a little bit more generous with concessions and tenant improvements. One of the trends that we believe we're going to be seeing, and this goes to your reuse comment earlier, is even where people are moving back to the office, they're not moving back full time. So you're seeing some of these traditional offices converted into more of a WeWork sort of shared office space so that people can use them when they need to use them. But you have the flexibility of reconfiguring your footprint within the office as people's needs change.
And Mark, how about you? A couple of trends that you're seeing on total requests out there?
So I think there's a couple key points here, Nick. And I think one of the really important pieces that we often forget when we're looking at some of this information is we look at the world of commercial and we take these data points coming in, and so often that information is driven by very large users. So for instance, in our Minneapolis Central Business District, we'll have Target vacate and create a couple 100,000 square feet of available space. Well, Target clearing out a couple 100,000 square feet of space is a lot different than a small user. And it's just so important as an everyday broker in the market, as we take a look at what's out there, when you start to understand that 70% of the commercial buildings in the United States are 10,000 square feet or less. Okay, so, but when you look at the data, I don't care if it's sales data, leasing data, and all the rest of it, so much of that is measured by the very large users or the trophy type users. And that can really skew the data. So there's a big difference between General Mills and Target staying home and your everyday accountant that still needs to have people in the office to get the work done. And I think that that's a really important piece. There's no doubt it is all very dynamic. It's very fluid. I agree with Rick that it's going to take some time, because just if you look at the headlines alone can be extraordinarily confusing, because we can have one tech company saying we'll boil them until they get back to the office, and the next tech company saying you never need to come back again. So it's a very, very dynamic state right now.
Nick, can I jump in with an opportunity?
No. Of course you can. No, Rick, go ahead.
Only
if you show us your coffee mug. Show us your coffee mug first. Okay, that sums up commercial real estate right there. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Rick.
Data is what Tiggers do best, just so you know. Mark just made me think of something. One of the trends we've seen that's not office specific, but I think leads to an opportunity is what's going on in the industrial sector. So we've seen huge investments in warehouse and distribution facilities in markets that are metro adjacent. So here in California, we have something called the Inland Empire, which used to be a bedroom community for LA County, Orange County, and San Diego County. Now you have these massive distribution centers popping up. Well, people are moving to the Inland Empire to take these jobs, and they're not bedroom communities anymore. It's where people live. And as these distribution centers pop up, as these cloud computing centers pop up to support work from home workers, these other businesses, that Mark was talking about, that came along or left because of Target, are doing the same thing around these distribution centers. So I would be looking, if you're an agent or a broker in a major metro area, I would be looking at these metro adjacent areas for the opportunity for the kind of small office space that Mark was talking about to become part of that community. I think there's going to be a lot of small commercial buildings, commercial developments that go around to support these new businesses that have been, part of the industrial boom over the last couple of years.
That makes total sense. And especially when you talk about the suburban markets have fared much better. And part of it, look at residential. People moved to the burbs. They moved to more rural outlying areas. Cost of living was better, and that trend hasn't seemed to stop. Okay, so answer this for me. We talk about, you mentioned vacancy rates are just fairly high overall. Granted, it's geo-specific, and also the sublease market. So saying that there's plenty of space. Why, when I look out my window here, do I see cranes and new commercial high rises going up, and it doesn't seem to be there doesn't seem to be an end in sight for that? If we have all this supply, how is the new construction within this space continuing to move as fast as it is?
That's a pretty good question. I'm not sure I have a really good answer for it. Look, the vacancy rates nationally are between 16 and 17%. And to Mark's point, a lot of that's driven by the big box sort of companies. There are projections that over time this will change. I wouldn't be surprised, though. This goes back to your earlier comment, Nick. If a lot of these buildings you're seeing build up aren't traditional, exclusively office buildings, you could wind up with some of these skyscrapers you're talking about having retail on the lower levels, having office space in the middle levels, and having residential units at the top. And the Denver market, which I know is close to where you are, it has not suffered as much as some of the other markets, the New York, San Francisco's, Minneapolis's, Philadelphia's of the world. So every market's going to be a little bit different. And if you're in a market where you see population growing, where you see the number of jobs increasing, you're going to see some construction because that's where they're going to need the space.
And Mark, what are your thoughts on that?
And Nick, if I'm looking out and I see a crane, it isn't for an office building. Okay, so right off the bat, we know it is not for an office building. And 9 times out of 10, it's going to be for new condos, new apartment buildings, new mixed use. But it's going to be around housing. And that's why we've changed a lot of the zoning regulations within our urban areas to create higher density. And that's kind of a national trend, but it certainly is a trend here in our Twin Cities. And so those cranes, they're putting in housing. And a lot of it is higher end housing at that.
And speaking of that, go ahead, Rick.
Sorry. Yeah. Keep in mind that there are studies that suggest as many as 20% of the people who had been looking to buy a house have now opted to look for a rental property instead because affordability took such a hit with mortgage rates doubling. So the multifamily market, as Mark was talking about it a second ago, has some huge opportunities. And I do think, Mark, you're right. A lot of the cranes we see around the country right now are not for your typical office complexes. They're primarily for mixed use or for some sort of residential. And in fact, there's a lot of groups that are advocating in some of the bigger cities to change zoning laws so that you can take these vacant office buildings and turn them into residential units. That does require some work, does require some zoning changes, but it is definitely a trend.
And speaking of that, Mark, you mentioned, I think that's a very good point, how a lot of this, especially in the high density areas, are focusing on residential. How much adaptive reuse are you seeing? How many commercial buildings are they modifying to not only be commercial, but to split with residential and commercial? Are we seeing a lot of that? Is that a trend that you think will continue? Or is that kind of a short-term post-pandemic follow-up and we'll see what it looks like in a couple of years? Mark, what's your thought?
Well, my thoughts, I have very clear thoughts on it. You can read the newspapers and hear about some of this adaptive reuse happening maybe in Manhattan and some other urban markets, but around here we're not seeing it gangbusters by any means. I think it's a natural thought to think, well, why wouldn't you take that office box over there and turn it into housing? And it's just not that easy. There's a lot of things that are going against that. It can be absolutely cost prohibitive to take an office building and turn it into housing. And many people don't understand that. There's lots of other dynamics around it as well, such as the areas where office buildings are set today are not always the place where you want to live in terms of your neighborhood. And so I think there's a lot of other opportunities. What we're seeing, especially, let's just say with some of the smaller users. So let's talk about some of those again. What makes up a lot of the office buildings in the United States, some of these smaller buildings, is when we have an office building and you've got the zoning, say, that can support retail, and you've got a B1, B2, C1, C2, TN2, whatever that might be, and we have an opportunity to turn that into retail or other mixed use, and that other mixed use can even include some light industrial or warehousing. That's a great direction. And another great direction is to take, let's just say, that typical 5,000 square foot office, and half the employees are working from home now. One of the solutions that people are finding is there still is a large demand for individual offices. Now, of course, we all understand that individual office rentals is a very management intensive type operation. But yet, for many small users, now, again, with the towers, it may not be the solution. But for many other buildings to be able to say, I can now take that office that we don't need anymore, and rather than it sit vacant, I can generate $600 or $700 a month for that office and that one and that one and that one. So there are some other opportunities to start saying, where is the need? What do we need to fill this space up? And that is one of them. So it's not an end-all, be-all solution, but it is a way to still kind of get us through the next couple of years.
Well, and to your point, Mark, when you talk about commercial, people think it's easy. Just put some walls up. But think of plumbing. Plumbing is one of them that people don't think about in terms of that change. Yeah, Rick, go ahead.
So we were talking about vacancy rates, and the converse is true in the multifamily market. Vacancy rates right now are below 4%. And if you look at owner-occupied properties across the country, they're around 1%. We also have the largest group of young adults in the history of the country coming of age where they're at prime age to form a household. And we've done extensive research that suggests most people still prefer to live indoors. So if there's nothing for them to buy and there's nothing for them to rent, that's what keeps prices going up. But that also points to the opportunity for reuse where you have a facility in the right location and where zoning is going to permit it. And to Mark's point, where it's not crazy cost prohibitive. You mentioned plumbing. There are things like parking. There are other requirements that go into having a residential unit. But we're seeing a lot of reuse, not just in the office space, Nick, but also in the retail and the hotel space. And so some of those limited service hotels are becoming retrofitted to become sort of really low cost, affordable housing for people who are looking for that kind of first step that hasn't been available to them in years past. So
And
a lot of reuse.
I have seen a couple of hotels over the last couple of years that the cities have picked up and changed into homeless shelters. And so interesting. Okay, well, let's do this. There's a lot of talk on social media. So let's take a look at the buzz because there's certainly no shortage of conversation. And let's take a look at the first one. And gentlemen, I'll keep you up. This is from TikTok. Let's see what you think. Okay, there's a TikTok user. Is that a great point? I mean, we've seen this before. Okay, we talk about not only just the mathematics and space requirements, but this is about culture. A lot of companies are the culture is defined by being together. So, what are you also seeing out there for clients that you're working with or companies that you're studying on how these trends are affecting culture? Rick, maybe start with you on this one.
Biggest challenge for HR managers across the country, for executives who believe culture is important. A lot of that culture is, the water cooler conversation. It's interacting with your peers. So I can tell you from the perspective of our company, which has gone virtual, we have multiple events to get people back together over the course of the year. All hands meetings, celebrations, just individual groups getting together to try and do that. But the TikTok user is absolutely right. It's to have somebody go into an empty office space. There's no such thing as culture there. You're working in a ghost town. That was actually pretty clever TikTok. But that is going to be the big challenge in both hybrid and virtual workplaces going forward.
And Mark, what do you think? Are you walking in and seeing stuff like this, or people looking at subleasing, seeing culture like this?
Well, I think my thing, Nick, would be I've got a few kids, and I've got a daughter who just graduated from college, and she just entered the professional workforce. And so here you've got this 22-year-old getting out there saying, "I'm ready to go. I'm ready to meet my people. I'm ready to meet my managers, to sit down and learn these skills that I need to go out there and be a great working professional." And she wants to go in. She wants to be with people. And she'll get some encouragement to say, well, you can go ahead on in there. No one else is going to be in there, but you're welcome to go on in there. And so there's actually been a thing about that where there's been a lot of managers or middle managers saying, get back in the office, come on, sit down with your peers, and let's start collaborating again. But the very people saying get in the office are staying home. So there's a little bit of a disconnect between some of that going on in the workplace as well.
And I'm curious your thoughts on that. I mean, I think as a young executive, coming up through the ranks in my mid 20s, coming into an office building and the conversations and hearing people on the phone, and it just was exponential in my learning and it kind of advancing my knowledge within the industry. I'm just curious what you guys both think, a little bit off topic, but will there get to be a point where people are just lonely at home and not getting that over the desk, hearing somebody else's experience, and where maybe it is a forcing function to get people back?
Yeah, but the other part of that, Nick, is you make a huge point. So there's a lot of executives right now that are saying you can't go from a 25 to a 30 to a 35-year-old or 40 and move up that ladder by sitting on your couch at home every day. It just doesn't work. And so I think that, again, I think we're still somewhat in these early stages. This is all going to start to kind of play itself out as companies are saying, and again, it's going to work for one company. It's not going to work for another company. So there's not going to be this across the board that everybody's coming back. Is hybrid working here to stay? Sure. And some companies going to say we work perfectly fine. But then there's also, a lot of buzz out there saying, if you don't go in the office, we're not going to see you. And when we need to start cutting staff, you're the first to go. You're not in the office. Do we really need you? Can we hire somebody from the other side of the world who can do your job? And so There's a lot of job risk involved. Now, again, I'm an entrepreneur, so, I've got to go make my own way out there, so I don't need to worry about these things. But I find it really intriguing as you kind of look at that corporate work environment and say, it might be kind of an interesting game now, but be careful that it doesn't end up, really burning you and burning your career.
And Rick, your company's all at home sitting on the couch. You think you're going to stay that way moving on? Or do you think at some point people are going to get lonely and say, hey, I want to see my colleagues again?
I'll tell you, when we've had those get-togethers, I've had the chance to be face-to-face with some colleagues, and we've gotten a bunch of things done that would have probably taken us a week or more going back and forth, through email and Teams and Zoom and whatever, because you just can't replace that, that face-to-face managing by walking around kind of environment. So I think ultimately it's more of a hybrid model than it is a 100% virtual model for most companies. I don't know how you transfer knowledge efficiently. To Mark's point, as you hire people, how do you get them into your culture? How do you get behaviors to be the way they're aligned with your company's core values? It's much more difficult with an entirely virtual workforce. So I do think the future is hybrid, but the truth is, look, most people in management are old school. They've been through this kind of doing it the old-fashioned way, where everybody has to be in the office, 9 to 5, 8 to 6, whatever. So they're learning as they go forward, and you have a new generation of workers coming in saying, "Hey, I can be as efficient 99% of the time sitting on my couch as I can if I have to schlep into the office. And by the way, I don't lose 2 hours to my commute every day. That I could be more productive sitting here with my Tigger coffee mug and talking to you guys." So we're at the very beginning of this cycle, and it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out over time.
Okay, let's take a look at our next one. In fact, this is not just here at home, but this is something global. Thought this was interesting. Great project here, converting surplus existing vacant office space into new homes. Former Dublin office complex to provide homes for over 200 people. We kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but do either one of you look at things outside of the U.S. and how some of the international components are affecting this overall subject?
I don't spend a great deal of time immersed in international real estate, but these sort of outliers, the onesie twosies that pop up, I just think they show that the issues are the same in many markets. I suspect the conversion process is probably easier in a lot of other markets than it is in some of our cities that will strangle you to death with regulations. But look, when I used to work for another company, we actually sold a suburban mall to a local municipal government, and they converted it into mixed-use facilities. They've moved all their municipal offices in there. I've heard other malls actually beginning to look at residential units inside the mall. And if nothing else, that makes what my mother told me when I was a teenager come true. Because when I was a teenager, she said, why don't you just live at the mall because you spend all your time there anyway? And now as a senior, maybe I'll have the opportunity to do that.
So the question is ultimately, what store would you have lived in?
I actually worked in 2 stores. I did retail through college, so it would probably either have been the Gap or Kay Jewelers, but take your pick.
Let's go with diamonds. I like it. Mark, same to you. Any thoughts on how this crosses country boundary lines?
No, I think, the thing that comes to my mind, Nick, is kind of the investment piece of this. So when we have some of that, foreign investment, out of country investment, and saying, where do we want to go to the U.S. and where do we want to put our money? I've got 56,000 square feet for sale in downtown Minneapolis right now of an office product that's 2 blocks from U.S. Bank Stadium where the Vikings play. And it's gorgeous. It's beautiful. We've got views like you wouldn't believe. It's just absolutely wonderful. And I've got it priced so well, I can't move it. We can't move it locally. And actually the people who are kicking this thing around the most are from some out of state markets. And I wish I could get some out of country people coming in saying, you know what, now is the time. Obviously, and I think that's the thing that people are going to be missing out on, or they really need to understand. And the same holds true with the housing market, Nick. There's your world in and out. But, as we enter into these days where people talk about so much doom and gloom, really the bottom line is we have unbelievable opportunity. The opportunity that's going to be existing in the marketplace across the board these next 2 years is incredible. And so in my world as an everyday broker, I've been waiting for this cycle to kind of get here to say, let's get rid of this dumb, stupid, cheap money. Let's get into some realistic interest rates. Let's get this into a normal market. I'm a listing broker. So I'm a commercial investment listing broker. That's 95% of my time. That's all I do. It's pretty tough for people to sell commercial buildings when they don't have a 1031 replacement property. Okay, when there's nothing on the market to replace your property with, it's a really tough thing, because then you're just looking at a DST and you don't have any real property to go put it into. So I think it's the investment piece of this that we need to say, let's get through this. Let's get into 2023 so people can see, because right now in the commercial investment world, people get freaked out knowing what's going on with the elections, what's going on with the forthcoming recession, and they retreat to the sidelines and they chill out on the sidelines. They say, we're not doing anything. We're going to chill out and see what happens. And I think by the time we get through the first quarter, maybe into the second quarter of 2023, people are going to start saying, let's go. It's time to get going again here. The rates are where they are. We got to make the numbers work.
I think you may be right. And even though that's a beautiful space, hate to bring football into it, it may be a Vikings issue, not a space issue. But we'll leave that. We'll park that for now. And as a Broncos fan, I can't say much. Okay, let's look at our last one. Last buzz here. And this is just for quick comment from you. Commercial real estate is about math. Residential real estate is about emotion. Now, 9 out of 10 times, I would have to agree with this strip mall guy tweet. But I think commercial space has been more emotional in the last couple of years than I've ever seen it. Yes or no, do you agree with that? Why or why not? Mark?
I'll go with your 9 out of 10. I'll stick with your 9 out of 10. I think that's a good way to put it. And so it's interesting because, people will always come to me as a commercial only broker and say, I want to do what you do. And I don't want to deal with all this emotion of residential real estate. And I'm like, listen, I'm selling buildings for people where that's the bulk of their retirement. All right. So it can be that single office, single retail, single industrial user. And those monies are as important to them as the monies that are locked into their home right now. And so to think there's no emotion there, that would be a bit naive. Nonetheless, is it about the math? Is it about the numbers? Positively, it is. So I'll go with your 9 out of 10.
Right on. Rick, thoughts?
Can't argue with that. Even the argument Mark was making about emotions, he brought in, it was about money, which at the end of the day is about math. So I think your guy was right there. And I don't think, it's probably if you're a small investor and you just decide you have to sell because you're losing your shirt, there's some emotion involved there, but I really do think that's right. It's residential is emotional and commercial it's all about the math.
Okay, well, let's go back and look at our poll. At the top of the episode, we asked everyone, do we think everyone will return full time? 34.6% said yes, 65.4% no. I'm actually a little surprised that yes was that high. I thought it would be less than 10 or 15% would say everybody's going to go back 5 days a week. Okay, gentlemen, quick last final question for you. Is now the right time to invest in commercial real estate? Why or why not? Rick, we'll start with you and we'll finish up with Mark.
I'm gonna steal a line from the residential market. The best time to buy a commercial property was about 15 years ago, and the second best time is right now. There are still opportunities. To Mark's point, it's not a bad thing to buy into a declining market. Selling into a declining market isn't great, but if you can buy at the ebb, you're going to be well positioned when the market comes back, and it will come back.
Good comment, Mark. How about you?
It's a no-brainer right here. I mean, it's you want to talk about it's about the math. That's it. But I've been in this business for a very, very long time, and I used to buy a lot of real estate with interest rates that would be 9-10%, and I didn't care about 9 or 10% rates as an investor. I cared about, did my numbers work? How's my cash flow? And it's all about the numbers right now. Until sellers adjust their prices down to match the interest rates going up, we have to find that balance, and that just takes a little bit of time. So it's not a question, is now a good time? Absolutely, it's a good time. And when we look back 10 or 15 years from now, people are going to be smacking themselves going, why didn't I take advantage of this market over this, 2022 to 2024? So we've got just run the numbers and be smart, and you're going to do well.
Okay. Absolutely great advice. Rick Sharga from ATTOM Data, Mark Hulsey, Remax Results Commercial Group. thank you for your expertise in joining us today. Great thoughts to share.
Thank you, Nick.
Okay, well, as we round out today's episode, I'd like to offer you my final thoughts. As I listened to Rick and Mark, I think there were a couple key things. One, commercial real estate isn't going away. I think that is a fact. Number two, I think it's going to look different moving forward in our lifetimes of how we think about commercial space, how we use it, how we blend it with multi-use. I think some of those changes are here to stay. Number three, I think this is something generational, that when people talk about there's a generation that defined culture by everyone being in the office 8 to 5. And now people are saying, oh, how is there going to be culture and interaction? Some of the young workforce, by the way, they're not looking for the office space to define their culture and being social. They're doing it via social media and doing some of that online. And that's redefining how people socialize. It's not just the water cooler. It's not just the desk. But I also agree, not everything has landed yet. I think that we still are working through and have a couple years ahead of what this will look like in total. So thanks for joining us today again to examine what office space and commercial real estate looks like. A lot of great things answered. Of course, come back, join us, watch all the episodes from 2022. We thank you for joining us this year. This will be the last Keepin' It Real for 2022. Enjoy the holidays. We'll see you in January. And until next time, keep it real, everyone.